Hey, everybody. Just want to give you a quick bit of feedback on the speeches. So, at this point, you should have your evaluation form back that was emailed to you today. Um, Beyond that, there are some common things that I saw that I just wanted to point out to you. And I wanted to remind you again of how the grading works. So, let's take a quick look at that. This will be a very short video. So here is an old one. This isn't anybody from this class. But just be reminded that over here on this side, the poor is worth 0 points, fair 1, good 2, very good 3, excellent is worth 4. And so that brings you to a total of a potential 32 points. So you will see your score out of 32. There was a 2 point curve that was factored in, so you'll see that down there as well. This time it was, like I said, plus 2, and so you get the new number out of 32. That brings you over to a percentage. 27 divided by 32 is 84%, and that means it's 8.4 out of 10 points. That one's nice and easy. Now, the things that I want to point out because they were commonly missed. First, here in the second main point, or I'm sorry, the second main point. Sorry, I've been watching things all day. The second item on the evaluation form, make sure that you're following the outline exactly. You want to really make sure that you are following the order of the elements. So, here you've got attention getter, statement of purpose, thesis, relevance, and then the preview. So don't do things like combine some of these. So I saw a lot of folks combining statement of purpose with the preview. So instead of saying by the end of this speech, you should know more about voter fraud in this case, it was by the end of this speech, you should know more about the history of voter fraud, the current situation with voter fraud, and how we can prevent voter fraud in the future. You were sort of doing it all at once instead of separating that out. It's designed this way, purposefully. And again, it's not that I want you to lose all creative license when you're doing your speech, and that's why you have to use this outline. But I know that this works, and so once you're beyond this class, if you want to do some combining, find your own style, sure, you do you. But for now, this is like driver's ed, right? There's not an option that I want to play with. So make sure that you're following the outline, that you're breaking everything individually. Go back and watch the demo speech if you need to, so you can see that you don't need much filler. Those things will just flow together. The last thing on this one that I wanted to point out is this transition number 3. You may see use full like you do on this one. And all that means is make sure you're going back to main point 1 before you move on to 2 to 3. So instead of just saying, now that you know how voter fraud is currently viewed, let's talk about the future of voter fraud. You would want to say, now that we know about the history of voter fraud and how it's currently playing out, let's finish up by looking at the future. So you're doing all of that review within your transition. All right, the next item, number 3 here is your sources. I can't stress this enough, guys, right? Publication and date. That's what you have to cite. Lots of folks are citing authors. We don't need that. I mean, especially, like, I guess good for you for trying, but like, there's 6 names and they're all very long in some cases, and people are just trying to get it all in there. Don't do that. Just the publication that it comes from. So the journal name, the CNN, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, whatever, and the year. That's really all we need. Coming back to that, the only exceptions would really be one if some author was really well known. So Bill Gates, somebody like that, Oprah Winfrey wrote something, then yeah, cite their name. But if the journal is abbreviated, like some things like NPR and NBC, we know what that means. We don't need you to go any details on those, right? But if it's like the C31 journal, like we don't know what that is. And so you'll want to tell us what those abbreviations stand for. Give us the full version. If something is not well known, like it's a website that's out there that you think is good and it's credible, just take an extra 3-4 seconds and explain to us what that is. So according to Generalcomment.com, they say that blah, blah, blah. By the way, generalcomment.com is the number one website for the thing, whatever it is, right? But if you're unable to explain to us why it's something credible, you probably want a different source. And that brings me to this idea of don't forget the sound test, like the what the hell is that test. So if something is, something that sounds strange and you're like, really, you want to cite that? You probably don't want to cite that. So be aware of that. Um, Also, with sources, if you have any statistics, make sure they get cited. And the date is important for all of these, but it's very important for statistics. Some people were talking about percentages of people that do certain things, but there were no dates. So I don't know if that's current or if that's historic. So you want to make that clear for your audience. And then last thing with this is, well, two more things really. One is if something is peer reviewed, make sure that you're citing that clearly, right? So according to the peer reviewed article, blah blah blah, go tell us that it's peer reviewed. Um, so that's part of it. Another part is, um, if you have the same source being used over and over with no new sources in between, you don't need to recite the source, right? So you don't need to say, according to general comments from this year, blah, blah, blah. Also, according to general comments from this year, blah, blah, blah. You can just assume that the rest of that comes from that same source until you bring up a new one. And then if you go backwards, then yeah, you'll want to recite that to get us back to where we were. Um, there was another thing. I have notes, but something popped in there, but it's gone. I'll come back to it in just a minute when it comes back to me. Um, for the next item, number 4, you'll probably see something like a few bumps in delivery, and that's no big deal. If you had something more than that, the vocal fillers, jargon, inappropriate, and I don't mean like inappropriate like you're cursing, but the language maybe was too complex or not complex enough, you'll see that special note, on your own. But don't worry if you have a few bumps. That should have been a very good if it was a few bumps, if that's what it said. For the next one, number 5, this was a big one this time. It's not usually, but this was, I think it could be the online deal. But add energy to your presentation. If you don't seem interested or a little bit passionate, then no one else will care. And again, I know this was the informative and you weren't supposed to get too excited. I get that. But some people were very monotone, very low volume, very not, it really comes down to not being engaging. So the audience won't want to listen. There were some snooze fests, let's be honest, but make sure that you are, you're at least shifting your pitch, your volume as appropriate as it naturally would happen. So you want to make sure that you are looking alive out there. The next item is the clear pronunciation, grammar, articulation. You'll see that if that mattered. That wasn't a common thing. But number 7, that was something that was pretty popular. So first of all, for movement and posture, I did not count that against you at all, unless it was extremely distracting. And there were just a couple folks who, were a little distracting with some motions. Some people were rocking, some were swaying, some were kind of bouncing. So don't let that detract from your speech overall. Um, Gestures, make sure those are visible and purposeful, right? So I could see sometimes people would gesture and you would see sort of like the tops of their fingers here. Make sure that those are visible. And if that means that you just need to lower your camera down a little bit so that you can get everything in the frame, or you need to slide back, or whatever it might be, get yourself in the frame, practice that way a couple times before you record, and then you should be able to tell if it's going to work out or not for you. Eye contact. Don't read the speech. Now, in an in-person class, you'd have notes in your hand, and it's pretty easy to tell when you're reading. This is a little bit trickier, which is good for you. But realize that your eyes are the focus, because that's the thing most people are going to look at. And if that's the case, when you do these big sharp sort of jerks with your eyes, it's very distracting. And I'm not telling you not to read. I'm simply saying, look at the camera, speak for a moment. Don't just jerk your eyes down. Right? I'm looking here, I'm talking. Now I'm just going to move down, grab some notes, and I'm going to stay down here for a second. Then I'll come back up and talk to you for another minute. Right? So that's what I mean there. If you see something about, don't read, eye contact is camera contact, that sort of thing. The last item, the time. So, most of these were good, but there's no reason to not hit the mark on time. I mean, no reason for that. Um, if you're not within the time bounds, redo it. I mean, don't lose a point or two for that reason, when that's something that you could easily, just re-record and be done with, and you'd probably fix it just fine. I'm still thinking about this source thing. There was another thing that came into my head. So, if there's an abbreviation, give us the full version the first time, at least if it's not well known. If it's not well known but you still want to cite it, make sure that you explain why. Make sure it passed that test of, does this sound like something I'd want to cite? Oh, that was the one. So, don't forget the difference between primary and secondary sources. We talked about that in the lecture weeks ago. But there was a lot of folks that were saying some pretty strange ways of citing, right? So it would be like, according to a CNN article who quoted this person who is the position, right? You don't need to get into all that, right? You just, if they're quoting something that's an original document or a study or whatever, cite the original. That's where you want to go with that. This is also true with things like encyclopedias. Which, there was a couple folks who used those. Those are fine, but if the encyclopedia specifically says that they are taking it or basing it on some other existing document or material, go ahead and find that primary source. That was the other thing I wanted to mention. Otherwise, make sure you've got dates and publication. Can't stress that enough. Date, publication, date, publication, date. So yeah, follow the outline exactly. Be careful with the way you're citing sources. If you have a few bumps in delivery, don't worry. That just means, practice a little more. Make sure you have some energy, whether that's through your pitch, your volume, your rate, but make sure that you are engaging in that way. Non-verbals, make sure we can see your gestures and that you're not distracting with anything. And then last but certainly not least, it's easy points. Hit that time limit. You've got a 2-minute window, and it changes for the next speech, right? The next two are a little longer, 5 to 7 instead of 4 to 6. So, as always, if you have questions on any of this, let me know. If you can't read my writing on something, let me know. I mean, I took pictures with my iPhone best I could, airdropped them to the computer, and then sent them to you. So, that is what it is. But I can translate if needed, but I hope that it's somewhat clear. All right. Have a wonderful week. Don't forget, quiz 3 is due this week. It's week 8. That is now in the week 8 folder. And we start Monroe's this week. There's already one lecture video on Monroe's. Shortly, probably either tomorrow or early next week, I will add the demo where we will talk about using your outline to use Monroe's. Also, very last thing, if we have talked about you turning something in late, I know that no one has been told to turn it in after Friday, which is tomorrow. So if you're turning that in for partial credit or whatever, make sure you get that in on time or it just won't count. All right, as always, thanks, and I will see you next time.